Yes.
Mrs. Corinne DETTMEIJER-VERMEULEN, you are the Dutch National Rapporteur on Human Trafficking and Sexual Violence Against Children. You have just addressed a seminar on the 1 in 5 campaign of the Council of Europe, and you presented very detailed figures on sexual abuses against children. Can you give us an overview of your analysis?
This was my first report on sexual violence against children, so I decided that it would be primarily a data report. So we asked data of every possible organization that we could think of that was important in deciding whether or not to prosecute or help children or prosecute offenders. And we decided that the part of the victims was just as important as that of the offenders. Well, I should say that the other way around. Part of the offenders was just as important as that of the victims. In order to minimize the occurrence of sexual violence, you need to target both groups. And this is in all the parts of prevention, primary, secondary and tertiary prevention. So what I did was I looked at the data from for over 5 years and to see a pattern. And in those data I looked at prevalence, I looked at identification, I looked at reporting of the victims themselves to the social agencies, or reporting to the police and seeing what the police did with that. In some, with some instances, I could not find a complete data overview, so I looked at smaller parts and translated that to to a country report. So what I did was I looked at all those decisions and all the filters that are there before a child gets the treatment that he or she deserves, or the filters when a perpetrator gets investigated, prosecuted and punished in the end. And for instance, if you look at the data on offenders, about 9,000 are reported to the police, so they are kind of known. In very many cases there is a face to it, and yet only less than 3,000 are being investigated. And if you look further down the tunnel, they drop out all the time. Now there is, in many cases you can blame a certain decision. You can think, why has this decision been made? Because this is the outcome is wrong. What I did was not look at the outcome, because there will always be decisions that have been made in a proper way but lead to an undesirable outcome. What I looked at is, how is the decision made, what criteria are used, and on how much information is the decision made. If I tell you that over there's a house on fire and you might see some smoke, you will not put on your coat, walk over there and see if it's really a fire. You will call 911 or 112 or whatever number you have to call. Now if you see signals of sexual abuse, well, you will never be completely sure, but to have more information, you need to investigate. And I think that that's one of the thresholds that I'm the most concerned about, that those decisions are made on too little information, and that is the basis of my report.
Yeah, you insisted in your presentation on the importance of structured information, and on the access of to information to organize or to try to address this issue. How do you see what kind of initiatives could be developed at local level, and how this information could help, in your view?
Well, first of all, I think a good registration is very, very important, because if you want evidence-based policy, you have to know what's happening. So the registration is a must. Secondly, I think training is a very important one. And what we see, of course, is that you can see bruises, you can see physical neglect, you can see dirty clothes or that kind of thing. Sexual violence, signs of sexual violence are much harder to identify, so you need training to see those signs. I'm really shocked that if I look at the level of professionals seeing that or identifying victims of sexual abuse within the family, it's less than 4%. And I'm not saying that they're looking away, but they're not looking well, they're not looking profoundly enough or with a trained eye. So training, in my opinion, is extremely important.
And how do you see the role of organizations such as the Congress, local and regional authorities, and the involvement of the European levels for this kind of dissemination of information?
I think that and I think first of all, the Lanzarote Committee has done a wonderful job in identifying new forms of sexual violence, and I looked at all those in my report. And things like grooming or child pornography, sexual, all those forms need European or global cooperation. And I think that what the Lanzarote Committee has done is looked at how to implement all these new forms of sexual violence into the member states' regulations and criminal code. But we need to go on from there because, for instance, if somebody in the UK grooms supposedly underage girl, but it happens to be a policeman or woman, then in the UK you could be, well, this would be the evidence. In the Netherlands, this could not really be the evidence, and furthermore, if you're grooming somebody of whom you thought they were underage, but they are in reality grown-ups, then it doesn't constitute a criminal act. So all those things we will have to look at that together, because it's very well possible that this man in the UK is grooming a girl in Germany, and that the German parents will take over. And so these discussions that are being held within the committee, I think, are very, very important.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.